In the designation of their aircraft, the United States used the X to designate an experimental aircraft. Almost every new fighter fielded after World War II started out with the X prefix to its designation as the Air Force, Navy, and manufacturers test the new aircraft. So, before we can speak of the F-104 Starfighter, we need to discuss in a nutshell its predecessor, the XF-104. In December 1951, Lockheed Skunk Works chief engineer, Kelly Johnson, visited the fighter pilots fighting against the MiG-15 in Korea. Many pilots felt that the MiGs were superior to the large and complex-designed American fighters. What they wanted was a small, simple aircraft with excellent performance, or in the words of Colonel Gabby Gabreski, "I'd rather sight with a piece of chewing gum stuck on the windscreen." He also told Johnson that radar was a waste of time. Back stateside, Kelly immediately started the design of an aircraft along the demands of the pilots. If you like these kind of videos, you can support the channel by subscribing or liking the video. If you have suggestions, feel free to write them in the comments. Based on Kelly's design, the Air Force created a proposal in November 1952. Republic, North American, and Northrop submitted proposals along Lockheed's proposal. Obviously, Lockheed had a lead compared to its competitors, and the development contract for the XF-104 was granted to them in March 1953. The contract called for 2 prototypes. Lockheed had selected the J-79 engine as power plant, but the engine was not available yet, so the prototypes were instead powered by the Wright J-65. The first prototype was built in a blistering record pace and was available for testing by early 1954. Lockheed designed the XF-104 by wrapping the most aerodynamically efficient airframe around a single powerful engine, with the goal to minimize drag and mass. While most supersonic jets use a swept or delta wing, Kelly had a different wing design in mind for the XF-104. The mid-mounted, trapezoidal wing was deliberately extremely thin. The wing was so thin that on production variants, special protective guards had to be placed to protect ground crew from hurting themselves on the sharp wings. Such thin wings required that fuel tanks and landing gear had to be contained in the fuselage. The stabilator was mounted on top of the tail fin. The vertical tail fin was so small and so aerodynamically effective that there was a risk of Dutch roll. The Dutch roll is a phenomenon where an aircraft simultaneously yaws and rolls because of rudder input. To combat this, Kelly angled the wings downward. Because the J-65 engine was incapable of Mach 2, the air intakes were fixed geometry with splitter plate for the boundary layer bleed air. In case of an emergency, the test pilot could eject from the prototype, albeit in an unusual fashion, since the ejection seat fired downward instead of upwards. The reason for this was that ejection seats of that time lacked the power to safely clear the high T-tail of the XF-104. Testing with the first prototype started on February 28, 1954, but the first actual flight took place on March 4, 1954. The second prototype flew on October 5, 1954, and served as testbed for 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon. Sadly, both prototypes were lost due to crashes. The second prototype was the first one to crash. During a gun firing trial, the gun malfunctioned, causing vibrations which led to loss of cabin pressure in the cockpit. This caused the test pilot's pressure suit to inflate, blocking his view. The test pilot safely ejected, but discovered later that if he had descended to a lower altitude to deflate his suit, he could have saved the prototype. The first prototype was lost on July 11, 1957, while flying chase for a production F-104. Fin flutter caused the tail to be ripped from the airframe, forcing the test pilot to eject. There were some differences between the F-104 and the XF-104. The F-104 had a longer fuselage to accommodate the J-97 engine and extra internal fuel. The nose landing gear retracted forward instead of backwards like on the prototypes. Further testing with the YF-104 models added also a ventral fin for increased stability. Unlike the prototypes, the production models had inlet shock cones and the air intakes necessary for safely achieving Mach 2. Production models also had a fuselage spine fairing between cockpit and tailfin. Despite the loss of the two prototypes, all tests confirmed the potential of the F-104 and resulted in a contract for 17 YF-104 models and a production run of over 2,500 F-104 aircraft. Thank you for watching. In future episodes, I will discuss the production F-104s. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe and click the notification bell. You can leave suggestions for future videos in the comments.